Welcome to Candid Conversation. Psalm 41, we covered the first 5 verses last time, so we are starting in verse 6. Today I called Psalm 41, The Lord delivers Jesus from his enemies. The Lord delivers Jesus from his enemies. So we're starting in verse 6. It's interesting that in verse 5, it says mine enemies. It talks about mine enemies as plural. And then in verse 6, it switches to singular. And it says, if he come to see me. So, okay, well, we're just talking about mine enemies, and now all of a sudden there's one. He come to see me. So you would think that this would be, if it's going to singular enemy, then you would think that's referring to the devil, Satan. Jesus said he came to bind the strong man, and there in Matthew chapter 12. He's in Isaiah 49, it says that Israel is Satan's lawful captive. Jeremiah 31 says that the Lord will ransom Jacob from the hand of him who is stronger than he. So, and all that refers to the devil. So you would think that if he comes see me in verse 6 of Psalm 41 is a reference to the devil. So I would say that Satan came to see Jesus a whole bunch of times. He came to see him during his 40 days of temptations, Matthew 4, Luke 4, and even after the 40 days he's in the wilderness, he tempted him again afterward. Then I think of Judas Iscariot, when the disciples, Jesus and the disciples are having the Passover meal. Then it says in John 13:27, referring to Judas, it says, and after the sop, Satan entered into him. So there's Satan coming to see Jesus. I mean, Satan's going to kiss Jesus, basically, when Judas betrays him. And then, but probably, since the context of Psalm 41 is the Lord delivering Jesus from his enemies, and a lot of this seems to be, on the cross, yes, but also I think it refers to Jesus suffering in hell. So I think that in the context, if he come to see me, is probably a reference to Satan coming to give his best shot against Jesus when he's on the cross, and then down there in hell to try to get him to sin, especially on the cross, to try to get him to sin, so that when Jesus then pays for our sins, he couldn't do it. He couldn't succeed, because he would have to pay for his own sin. And he wouldn't have the strength within him to pay for his own sin due to, if you're a sinner, then you're under the bondage of death. The wages of sin is death. So I think if he come to see me, primarily is referring to Satan coming against Jesus there on the cross. And so a good reference to that is Isaiah chapter 50 and verse 8. Isaiah 50 and verse 8, Jesus says, who will contend with me? Let us stand together. Who is mine adversary? Let him come near to me. And the context shows that this is in the cross, because 2 or 3 verses before that, it talks about them plucking his hair off of his face there when he was on the cross. And he gave his back to the smiters. So when you see there, if he come to see me, I think is a reference to Isaiah 50 and verse 8, where Satan comes to contend with Jesus while he's on the cross. The next thing in verse 6, it says, his heart gathereth iniquity to itself. When he goeth abroad, he telleth it. Now that seems kind of weird. But his heart gathereth iniquity to itself. We see that in his initial rebellion in Isaiah 14, Lucifer. It said there's the 5 I will statements. And it says that Lucifer said these 5 I will statements. He said these things in his heart. Isaiah 14 says. So he gathered the iniquity into his heart by his 5 I will statements. And then he's trying to carry out those 5 I will statements. I will make my throne above the stars. I will sit on the sides of the congregation of the north. I will be like the Most High God. He does, of course, his big plan to do those 5 things would be if he can defeat Jesus on that cross. Get Jesus to sin somehow, and then he would not be that sacrifice for sins. And then who's going to be the sacrifice for sins? So then Satan wins. So gathering iniquity in his heart, I think references to that initial rebellion in Isaiah 14. And then it's like he's trying to muster up all his power. You know, think of a boxing match that you've got, you know, a boxer going against the heavyweight champion. And so the boxer is trying to muster up all his strength, you know, doing his exercises and everything, and health-wise, trying to get in the best shape to go defeat that other boxer, the heavyweight champion. And so I think of Satan as he's already gathered together iniquity with his initial rebellion in Isaiah 14. And it's like he's trying to get all the power of sin together so that when he comes against Jesus there on the cross, he hopefully can get him to sin. You know, the Pharisees, who are children of the devil, you see them when Jesus is in Jerusalem about to go to the cross. They're trying to tempt him. You got the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the lawyers. They're all trying to trap him and trick him with these questions, because it's a battle of words. Because if you believe in the lie program over the truth, then that's a sin. Whatsoever is not of faith is sin, Romans 14:23 says. So if Satan can tempt Jesus somehow to get him to sin, then Satan will win. And so him gathering iniquity into his heart sort of makes me think of that boxer, like he's trying to muster up all his strength to defeat the heavyweight champion. And then it says, when he goeth abroad, he telleth it. So going abroad, perhaps that's, you know, the 1 Peter 5, I think it is, around verse 7 or 8 says, the devil as a roaring lion, he goes to and fro seeking whom he may devour. And I think going abroad then would translate into him also going after Israel so that they will not be saved. You know, in Revelation chapter 12, you see that he fights the woman, Israel, but then she gives birth to a man-child, Jesus. And then he keeps fighting her. And then halfway through the tribulation period, when Satan is cast out of heaven, and he has to, so he's cast out of heaven, and then he has to, all he can do then is go concentrate on the earth. Then it shows the dragon was wroth with the woman, and he casts this flood after her and tries to swallow her up basically with the flood, but then God helps her so that she's not swallowed up, and the earth catches that water for Israel. But that probably when he's going abroad, because remember that Israel is scattered abroad. Leviticus 26, the 5th cycle of chastisement, shows that Israel is scattered among the heathen. So if Israel is scattered abroad and Satan attacks the woman, attacks Israel to try to keep the lost sheep of the house of Israel from being saved, then what he's doing going abroad is he's attacking Israel to try to keep the lost sheep of the house of Israel from being saved. John 11:52. John chapter 11:52 mentions, it says, the children of God that were scattered abroad. So that's a reference to Israel, who maybe they're lost sheep. That's why they're scattered. I mean, that's how they become lost. They're scattered, and they're people who will be saved. Romans 11:26 talks about, so all Israel shall be saved after the rapture, thereafter the fullness of the Gentiles be come in. So you can think of him going abroad, Satan going abroad, I think is trying to attack Israel so that the lost sheep of the house of Israel are not saved. So I think in this verse here, Psalm 41 verse 6, you see the twofold attack. And the way Satan would win, of course, is if he can get Jesus to sin. But short of that, if he can keep all the positions in heaven, the body of Christ, and all the positions on earth, the bride of Christ, Israel, from being filled, then he gets to keep those positions. So, and so I think you see the two-pronged attack of Satan here in Psalm 41 verse 6, coming after Jesus, and then if that fails, then coming after the woman, coming after Israel to try to get her not to believe. Because, you know, the mystery hasn't been revealed yet at this time. in Psalm 41. So I think that's what it's referring to when it talks about him going abroad. He's going after Israel that's scattered among the heathen. Okay, now verse 7, Psalm 41, verse 7. It says, now talking about Jesus, all that hate me devise my hurt. So I would see that, as I mentioned before, the Pharisees, Sadducees, the lawyers, the chief priests, the scribes, they hate him. They devise his hurt because they are really, as John 8:44 says, they are children of the devil. So they're serving the devil. They say they serve God, but they're really serving the devil. So they are trying to trap Jesus with legalities and try to get him to disobey the law. Like they come to him and say, well, who should you give tribute to? Do you give it to Caesar or do you give it to God? And of course, it's a trick question, because if you say, well, just give it to God, I mean, that's what you would think in the context of religion. You would think, oh, well, you gotta serve God. Well, then now Jesus has sinned because he's told people not to be subject to the rulers over them. And, they got a reason to get Jesus killed, which they say that Jesus said not to give tribute to Caesar, but that's not what he said. So even though they tried to trip him in that, it still didn't work, and they lied to try to say he did it anyway. He said not to give tribute to Caesar. And of course, if he says just to serve the government and not serve God, well, then you're disobeying, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, soul, mind, and strength. And so it's a trap. But yet Jesus says, well, render unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and render unto God the things that are God's. And so he gets out of that with the right answer. And questions like that are what I think verse 7 is talking about. All that hate me devise my hurt. They're coming up with situations, trick questions to try to trap him, where really if he chooses sides, he's going to sin, no matter which side he chooses. So then, of course, Jesus chooses the truth. So he doesn't really choose sides. He chooses God's side, and he goes with the truth. And so they can't trap him. But that's what I think verse 7 is saying, that all that hate me devise my hurt. All right, now verse 8. Psalm 41, verse 8. Let's see. Psalm 41, verse 8 says, an evil disease say they, an evil disease, say they, cleaveth fast unto him. And now that he lieth, he shall rise up no more. So that statement of verse 8 tells me what they're saying is that when Satan and his forces believed that when they crucified Jesus on the cross, that they won. Satan walks by sight and not by faith. And so they figure if Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life, and then he dies on a cross, well, he's no longer the life. No man cometh unto the Father but by me. Well, now no man can come unto the Father because he doesn't have any life in him because he died. And so him lying, I think, would be lying in the grave or lying in hell, as that his soul being made an offering for sin. So he's down there in hell at the bed of languishing. We talked about that last time that he was on. Psalm 41 verse 2 or verse 3 talks about the bed of languishing. So Jesus entering into hell, him dying on a cross, Satan and his forces and the children of the devil, because they walk by sight and think that, oh, they've won. They've killed Jesus, and no man can come to the Father but by Jesus, and now no man can come to the Father because he's dead. That's what they're thinking. So that's why I think it says there, they say, well, an evil disease is upon him. That would be, translation is, our sin is on Jesus, and he was unsuccessful in paying for our sin because he died on a cross. That's basically what I see that verse saying. So that's how that evil disease cleaveth fast unto him. And so now that he's dead, he lieth, then he shall rise no more. Now you know from the religious leaders, the Sadducees, they did not believe in the resurrection. So of course the Sadducees believed that. The Pharisees, I think of the Sadducees as sort of like I think of the Pharisees as sort of like the Catholics, if you want to try to put it in modern terms. I think of the Pharisees as the Catholics, and I think of the Sadducees as the megachurch people. So the megachurch people say, oh, we just love, we don't judge anybody, we just feel the presence of God, we sing these worship songs. And the Catholics are involved in all this legality. It's not about what you feel like. It's, well, we have the Eucharist, and you're drinking and eating the literal blood and body of Jesus, and you got to confess your sins to a priest, you got to pray the Hail Marys and the rosaries, and so you got all this legalities of the Catholics. And it's almost, even though they both say they're saying God, is almost the complete opposite of the megachurch people, because they're not interested in that stuff. They're just interested in emotions, feelings. And so when it comes to those sects there, a lot of times it was the Pharisees that came against Jesus, because Jesus is all about the law and, serving God and what the book says. What does the Bible say, And I'm following that. And the Sadducees are the liberal ones who don't even believe in the resurrection. So his main dealings were with the Pharisees. However, when you get toward that end there, when he's in Jerusalem just before he goes to the cross, you have both parties going against him, because one is very liberal, the Sadducees, and one is real conservative, the Pharisees, but they're both children of the devil. It's just two sides of the same coin, basically. And so they both want Jesus gone. And so you can see that the Sadducees, they say, well, there is no resurrection. Now, the Pharisees believe in the resurrection, but since they're children of the devil, and the devil, 1 Corinthians 2 says, if the princes of this world knew the mystery, that God's plan was the cross all along, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. And so I think the Sadducees sort of take the lead over the Pharisees here as being the right beliefs, and that the Sadducees say there is no resurrection. The Pharisees believe there is a resurrection, but they'll go along and have a compromise and say, well, there is no resurrection for this guy, for Jesus, because an evil disease cleaveth unto him, and he's lying down there in hell, and so he can't rise. So you have like today, being a right dividing Bible believer, we don't really fall into the Catholic camp or the Baptist camp. They hate it. Both of them hate us because we're not going with their religion. So both the liberal and the conservative Christians go against us. So, okay, that's how it was with Jesus, and that's what it is with all Bible believers, really, is that all the so-called Christians, the ones who didn't believe a true gospel, they're all against you because they're children of the devil. So I think that's why it says that they say that an evil disease cleaveth unto him. I think that's the Pharisees join the Sadducees and say, yeah, there's no resurrection for this guy. He lieth and he shall rise no more. So the Sadducees sort of take the lead in that. So then verse 9 talks about the one who betrayed him, Judas Iscariot. It says, mine own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. That is so that's Psalm 41 and verse 9, and that is quoted by Jesus in John 13 verse 18. And he says this actually before Judas does it. And in verse 19, it's because John shows Jesus as God. So Jesus says it in John 13 verse 18. I think it was right after he washed the disciples' feet. He says this. So it's before the Passover meal, but after he washes the disciples' feet, I think is how it is. And he gives the prophecy there. And he says that, he quotes Psalm 41 verse 9 to basically say that mine own familiar friend was Judas Iscariot, in whom I trusted. Now, Jesus knows, he says that he knows that Judas would betray him. He knows that. But so he didn't, I mean, it's not like he, as God, he doesn't really trust him, but in the sense of he trusts him in the sense that he's one of the 12. He's, just like the other disciples, he's with him in the ministry the whole time. You've got, so he's there with the 12. He is the treasurer. He trusts him with the money. Again, Jesus knows he's a thief. Jesus knows he's the one who's going to betray him, but in whom I trusted, meaning he's one of that inner circle there. I trusted him in the inner circle. I trusted him with the money. I trusted him with the parables. He says the understanding of the parables, they're not for those unbelievers out there, but they are for you. You are to know the mysteries of the kingdom because you are believers. Well, that included Judas Iscariot. Now, of course, Judas Iscariot couldn't understand those things, had to be given to him by God, but he was in that audience when Jesus spoke that. So that's in the sense that he trusted him. So mine own familiar friend, in whom I trusted, which did eat of my bread, hath lifted up his heel against me. Jesus says that before Judas actually betrays him, because Satan has not entered into him yet, and he hasn't betrayed him yet. But he says that in John 13:18, and in John 13:19, Jesus specifically says, the reason I'm telling you this is so that you know that when it happens, that he says, I am he, meaning I am God. I am the Messiah, the Son of God, because I can tell you what's going to happen before it happens. So Jesus quotes John 13:18. John 13:18, Jesus quotes Psalm 41 verse 9 as a reference to what will happen to him by Judas Iscariot betraying him, so that they understand that he is God. Genesis 3:15, that first prophecy of a Redeemer coming, it says that the seed of the woman, who is Jesus, shall bruise the head of Satan, but that Satan will bruise his heel. So really, Jesus stomps on him, and so it's not the same with Judas, but you notice it doesn't say that Judas stomps on Jesus. It says he lift up his heel against me. In other words, he's trying to destroy him. What Satan does is through Judas Iscariot, is he tries to kill Jesus, forever through the crucifixion. So when it says he lift up his heel against me, I think that's a reference to the crucifixion. But because of the resurrection power of God through Jesus, the fact that he had never sinned, that he can not only get out of hell for himself because he never sinned, but he can also pay for our sins. And so the prophecy in Genesis 3:15 is that Jesus will bruise Satan's head and Satan will bruise Jesus' heel. But the prophecy of Psalm 41 verse 9 is that mine own familiar friend Judas Iscariot hath lift up his heel against me. And Satan does that through Judas. So the idea is that Satan is like he's getting ready to stomp out Jesus to kill him. And through the crucifixion, that's the plan. But in reality, because Jesus has the power over death and hell due to his perfect life and the righteousness of God in him, always doing the Father's plan, that he is able to conquer sin. And so instead of Satan stomping on Jesus, Jesus stomps on Satan, because Genesis 3:15 says that I will bruise his head and he will bruise my heel. So that's a reference to Jesus then going to stomp on the head of the devil to bruise his head, and in the process, Jesus' heel gets bruised, which I think refers to the the nail prints and the side in his hands and his feet, and then on the sword piercing in his side. But as far as corruption, there's no corruption in his soul when he's in hell. His flesh rests in hope. He gets the glorified body. So, and I think really God could have healed those prints, the nail prints and the sword piercings, but he does it as an eternal reminder of the payment that Jesus did for us, to show his love for us. And so I think it's just interesting that the prophecy is that Judas will lift up his heel against me, which means the crucifixion, but he is unsuccessful in stomping out Jesus, and instead Jesus stomps the devil at the Genesis 3:15 prophecy. Okay, well, as you can see, I'm at work, so we're out of time. We'll pick up in verse 10 next time. Thanks for watching.